This is El Salvador. Located in Central America, it was once considered the most dangerous country in the world. It was so dangerous that just 8 or 9 years back, people even called it the murder capital of the world, because on average, 16 to 20 people were killed there every single day. Between 2014 and 2017, gang wars made things even worse. Around 20,000 people were killed, and about 20% of the population had to leave the country. But in just the past 4 years, the world's most dangerous country has transformed into one of the safest countries, with a crime rate now even lower than that of the United States. El Salvador is the smallest country in Central America, but geopolitically it is extremely important due to its location. It lies south of Mexico, between Guatemala and Honduras, and because of its Pacific Ocean coastline, it also has access to the Panama Canal. This means if the government is destabilized, local gangs could potentially threaten one of the world's most important trade routes, the Panama Canal. This is why the United States has always had a strong interest in El Salvador. The relations between the two countries are so close that in 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, El Salvador was the only Latin American country that joined the American coalition forces. Furthermore, all of El Salvador's airports can be used by the US military at any time, and they are mostly used for anti-narcotics missions. If you visit El Salvador today, you'll be amazed by its beauty and peace. It's hard to imagine that just a few years ago, this very country was plagued by extreme violence. And a significant part of this violence is linked not only to El Salvador's history, but also to something many of us consume every morning, which is coffee. In the early 19th century, El Salvador's coffee industry was booming. At the time, El Salvador was under Spanish Empire's rule, and coffee made up 95% of its GDP. However, a major issue was that 77% of agricultural land was controlled by just 1% of the population. This created massive income inequality. The entire country was controlled by 14 families who made laws only to benefit themselves. In 1821, El Salvador gained independence from Spain, but those same families continued to rule for years. Then from the 1930s to the late 1970s, the country was under a military dictatorship, which introduced land reforms that benefited those elite families. As a result, public resentment against the government grew, eventually leading to a brutal civil war between far-left and far-right political groups that lasted until 1992 and claimed the lives of 65,000 people. Throughout this period, the US supported the Salvadoran government financially and with weapons. Around 500,000 people fled El Salvador to other South American countries, while many ended up in Los Angeles, a city that was already a hub for gang activity. These newly arrived Salvadorans became targets of existing gangs. In response, they formed their own community for protection, which eventually evolved into the notorious MS-13 gang. What started as a protective community turned into a hardcore criminal gang, which began spreading crime in US cities. After the Civil War ended in 1992, the US began arresting gang members and deporting them back to El Salvador. By then, El Salvador's economy and institutions were in ruins, creating an ideal environment for gangs to thrive. The deported gang members still had contacts with criminals in the US, which allowed them to smuggle weapons into El Salvador and expand their influence using those weapons. These gangs began extorting businesses and shopkeepers. Anyone who refused or tried to contact the police was killed. Between 2000 and 2011, gangs completely took over the country. The government was helpless, and the public lived in constant fear. Prisons were overflowing with gang members, yet the situation only worsened. People were so scared of kidnappings that they stopped sending their children to school. Many Salvadorans attempted to migrate, legally or illegally, to the United States. The sheer volume of immigrants alarmed the US government, which urged the Salvadoran authorities to take strong action against the gangs. But it appeared even the government feared the gangs. In 2015, the Salvadoran government passed a law declaring gangs as terrorist organizations, even assigning up to 60 years in prison for minor crimes by gang members. Despite this, crime rates remained unchanged. The government even tried negotiating with the gangs, but all attempts failed. Public anger against the government was mounting. Then in 2019, a young political activist with a strong social media presence gained popularity: Nayib Bukele. Bukele was the mayor of San Salvador, the capital, and he was very vocal about the deteriorating law and order situation. He criticized the government's soft stance on gangs. According to him, the only way to reduce crime in El Salvador was a zero-tolerance policy toward gangs. People resonated with his views, and in 2019, Bukele was elected president with 53% of the vote, and thus began the transformation of El Salvador. Upon assuming power, Bukele immediately got to work. First, he presented a bill to the assembly requesting a $19 million loan from the US, but when legislators rejected the bill, government forces stormed the Capitol building and intimidated lawmakers. Eventually, due to public pressure, the loan was approved. Using the aid from the US, Bukele took two major steps. He built a maximum security prison on 410 acres to house 40,000 inmates. He formed a joint force of 38,000 police officers and 24,000 soldiers. This force patrolled cities around the clock, conducted surveillance, arrested gang members, and sent them to the new prison. Although the pressure on gangs started building, there was no significant decline in the crime rate until March 2022. That month, a major gang war erupted, and within just 3 days, nearly 100 people were killed. Bukele quickly passed a special exemption bill through the assembly, which allowed the government forces for the next 30 days to arrest anyone without a warrant, search any home, and in some cases even had the right to shoot to kill. During those 30 days, none of the detainees had the right to a trial. In the following months, over 70,000 people were arrested. Anyone who resisted was shot on the spot. By the end of 2022, El Salvador's murder rate had dropped by 56%, and by 2023, the overall crime rate had fallen below that of the US. Today, Salvadorans roam markets freely. Businesses are no longer extorted or threatened. All credit goes to Nayib Bukele, whose approval rating surpassed 90% in just 2 years. Now, many leaders in Latin America are considering adopting similar policies to control crime. However, according to many analysts, El Salvador paid a heavy price to eliminate crime. That price is the unchecked power now held by Bukele. The special exemption law passed for 30 days has been extended 22 times and is still active. As a result, 2% of the population is in prison, most of whom have not even had a trial. Local journalists report that many arrested individuals are actually innocent. Their families don't even know which prison they're in, or whether they're even alive. Take the example of Mejia, whose daughter was taken by the forces 1.5 years ago. He still has no idea where she is or if she's alive. There are thousands of such cases, showing that this law has become a nightmare for many. In January 2022, Bukele's forces raided the offices of prosecutors who were investigating corruption within his government. They were intimidated to the point that 4 investigators fled the country and the cases were buried. So yes, on one hand, Bukele has undeniably achieved a miraculous transformation, but on the other hand, in the process, he has become so powerful that his government is no longer accountable to even the courts. Perhaps such extreme measures were necessary to restore peace, but only time will tell what this unchecked power will mean for El Salvador's future. What do you think? Was this the best way to eliminate crime in El Salvador, or was it a brutal method that could lead to serious consequences later? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We love reading them. These were the sources we consulted for this video. If you liked the video, do give it a like and subscribe to the channel.